Welcome and thank you for joining us here. Well, some people have remarked on the way in which the novel resembles a play, and I wondered if you had thoughts about that. It sort of came up for me seeing the actors performing this now. Is there a feeling of a play in it for you?
Actually, no, I never think in terms of plays. I've tried to write them and I can't do it. But my books are becoming more and more filled with dialogue. I think it's because I appreciate, and in this book it seemed especially necessary, the way people present themselves to each other in conversation, especially people who don't find their relationship to the world particularly easy to deal with, and who therefore, speak carefully in a way that characterizes them.
It's they are remarkable conversation partners in the novel, right from the beginning. There's a feeling of push and pull between them, this way in which they are in a conversation that will not be stopped, even if they try, even if other people try. And that seems to me to be like the heart of the book, is that conversation they cannot let go of with each other.
Yes. And they never do let go of each other, even despite anything,
Is it is the dialogue then in this novel, would you say, like a product of the significance of that, or is it like a greater interest in what people say to each other? I mean, these are I should say also that one thing that impressed me about the novel was that these scenes are much longer than most people see.
Yes. World of truth in that. Well, Alex, I think I may even have confessed in our old acquaintance that I try to let my books sort of generate themselves out of themselves. If I write a scene that seems to want to be longer, I'm very permissive. If I want a conversation to go longer than the normal expectations of a novel would allow, I let it go longer. It seems to me that there's an interior logic in a book that governs its composition more than any theory of novels or anything that stands outside a particular book. I'm sort of a self-indulgent person. That's how I like to write, and frankly, I indulge myself. That's what it comes down to. If I feel there's more character to be felt in the course of a conversation, I'm happy to let the conversation go.
So with this novel, obviously you knew these characters already. Did it begin with the thread of a particular conversation in this beginning set of pages, or like how did you get drawn into the conversation?
Well, I don't quite remember. If my memory is faithful to the truth at all, I think that this initial attraction that they feel, and at the same time that something has happened that really ought to rupture this relationship. Being abandoned in a restaurant is not anybody's idea of a good time. What can I say? I mean, they've had this initial conversation that actually is reported later in the book, in which, because of his dress and manner and all the rest of it, she thinks he's a minister. And for the world that she comes from, that's an important status. That is, I don't mean important, but I mean one that is value charged, she feels that she can be courteous to him and talk to him because she feels as though culturally they sort of know each other at that level.
And I think there's the sort of peaks and valleys of those conversations come in some ways out of the way they are partly, once I suppose she realizes her mistake, she can't quite be rid of him. The thing that I was thinking of, I'm fascinated by Jack as a character, and I think that it seems to me that he has always been mistaken for someone a little more respectable than he is, even by the people that, or perhaps most especially by the people who love him, and that sometimes he plays along with that and then must always let go of it. It's I think it's also the case that after reading about him for so long in the other novels, now that we finally meet him this way as well, we have this kind of almost interdimensional sense of him, right, from what precedes him, and so part of the startling quality to the novel to me is this feeling of like, well, here they are. Here's Jack and here's Della. But that way of I'm thinking of something that actually that you said to me when I was your student, where you were talking about how it's important to read books that you can't quite understand, so as to sort of stretch towards understanding them. And I think he is a little like that towards the world, maybe. I'm not sure.
The world does not make complete sense to him in general or in particular. So, he I don't want to psychoanalyze my own character. I couldn't do it. But he because he can't kind of clothe himself with all the protections of respectability and success of some kind and all the rest of it, he is very vulnerable to, to anything, to all circumstance. But this is all, he understands it too well, and he doesn't understand it at all. These things are simultaneous,
Is there? So with most books, I think there's always a sense that there's something that you don't understand that you want to understand that compels the writing of it. Was that the case for Jack, for this book, for Jack?
Yes.
And do you want to tell us anything about what those might have been for you?
Well, I think there are a lot of people in the world. I know this because of the way people speak to me about their own Jacks. There are a great many people in the world who are very deeply loved, and for some reason do not have. They can't take any warmth or nurture from the fact that people do love them. And so there's, when you see that, you think, what are they seeing? How is this being experienced? What do they know, even if they can't articulate it? His family loves him. There's no shadow of, so that's a given that he's ingratiating in that way. It's also a given that he can't make a life out of it, or can't forgive himself things that would enable him to accept love.
And so this was part of what you were writing to understand in writing this novel?
Yes,
Um,
you know, one hopes to have more than one reason, but yes, that was
sure, yeah.
certainly in my mind.
Was there anything that surprised you of what you did learn?
Well, I think many things did actually. I mean, it's a very odd experience to engulf yourself in the consciousness of someone that really, I mean, in some way, I mean, he and I have read the same books, you know, that's never a surprise. But in so many ways, he would be someone that I would not consider myself to have access to, you know. And I tried, I think, to understand him at the same time to maintain this sense of inaccessibility about him, even relative to my understanding of him.
That's interesting because that does. I feel like that does come through in his character, the way in which we feel both. We feel always as if we are about to understand him, and then something else that he does both offers some kind of some further understanding of him, but it arrives a little bit by surprise. There's something. There's this sort of, I don't want to call them gentle shocks because that sounds kind of disgusting, but it's a way of like the in some ways, I suppose there's part of experiencing Della in this novel is seeing how often our reactions, or at least when I was reading it, my reactions agreed with hers. The sort of, you know, the kind of exasperation, the being charmed against her will, that sort of movement back and forth. I'm still so amazed by the graveyard scene. And I wondered how that came to be in your, how that was inspired, if there was some. I know that you like graveyards.
Yeah.
Or that you have liked graveyards.
Depends. You know, I'm not just blanket pro graveyard.
Right, sure.
It can be very fun. Well, as a matter of fact, I went with a friend to St. Louis a couple of times to just be in the city and look at the city. And one of the things that is remarkable, besides that bridge, which is very beautiful, is this vast cemetery called Bellefontaine. And it has, you know, it's full of great monuments of various kinds and vast trees, and it's very verdant, and it goes on forever, and it has a very large pond or a very small lake, I don't know. But it's also the sort of the history of the grandeur of St. Louis, you know, William Clark is buried in it and so on. And I thought I wanted a setting in which they could actually just be together and talk. And if they met together in the cemetery, you know, of course he would be protective of her and so on, but they would not be observed or overheard or in any way threatened or insulted or anything. And, you know, the thing that they feel most, you know, as a irritation or a sadness is that their actual contact with each other is so limited. They can't sit down on a park bench and just talk with each other, you know. So that was an opportunity for them to know each other, to know each other's thoughts and all the rest of it, without the disruptions that the society they live in would visit on them in almost any other setting.
There's there's more and more, I think, there's more of a, to my sense at least, more of a conversation, popular conversation around the legacy of Jim Crow in the United States, especially in the last year, partly due to the uprising and partly due to entertainments like Watchmen and now Lovecraft Country. I wondered, I mean, Jim Crow obviously is not news to you, but in writing this, did you, you were obviously trying to structure, the novel feels very carefully structured around how much care they must take around how they are with each other, this kind of way that the threat of state violence is always hanging over their relationship, or even the possibility of their relationship. Were there surprises for you in researching that for this book, or like even things that you hadn't known about?
Well, when you look at, I mean, I knew about, Jim Crow and all that in general, as one does, historically, but when you actually read the local history of a place where it was very important, and St. Louis was by no means alone in this, it was very pervasive all over the country. But you find out things like that it was against the law to teach Black children at high school level. It was against the law. And so a Black minister in St. Louis anchored a raft in the middle of the Mississippi River and rowed students out there so that he could teach them in this no man's land between Illinois and Missouri, because it would have been illegal in Illinois also.
Wow.
So, I mean, you think about Jim Crow as a general sort of legal thing, but the applications of it are completely nuts. And when you think of sane people trying to make lives in that context, that I talk in the book about how they condemned the Black neighborhood of St. Louis. They destroyed it. They destroyed 44 churches. And then they decided what they would do with the land, and it took them a long, long time. But the first order of business was simply to eliminate this prosperous Black neighborhood. There's so much, when you see these things at close range, the specific anecdotes, it's crazy. It would be very strange, I mean, since Jack does not identify with the social order particularly, he can have a certain perspective on these things, he can also fear that in some way, actively or passively, he's part of it, He's not actively, because he's really not terribly active, but you know what I mean.
No, I know. Well, he has this, I mean, part of that conversation between them, of course, is his sense of what might or might not put them in danger, and her sense of it also, and the way in which they are constantly negotiating that right through to the ending, which I won't spoil for the readers in the audience, but even that last moment is utterly dominated by it.
Yes.
And which to me was an incredibly powerful way to end the novel. I think, there's been so much conversation also in the last few years about, should writers try to write about characters who are not like them, and what the sort of the thing that impressed me, I suppose, about this novel also was this way in which Della was so vividly alive to me as a character, and the history that shaped both of their lives was was also represented, but also the way in which this struck me as the kind of, I mean, and I don't mean it to sound hygienic in this way, but there's a role that white writers can meaningfully have in these conversations, which is to honestly write about how these laws, how these histories shaped us. And I wondered if that was part of at all the drive to think about this. I mean, I know that your sense of America and this historical moment extends way into the past beyond Jim Crow, but how much of that was for you part of your interest in this territory?
Well, it's, from the very beginning, from Gilead, it's been a very central part of my interest. I did, when I first came to Iowa, I did all sorts of research into the origins of Middle Western civilization, where all the little colleges came from and so on. And I was very interested by the abolitionist settlement of Illinois, Iowa, Ohio, which was crucial in the Civil War. The fact that slavery was rejected by those states. But in any case, there was a period after the Civil War, and also before it, when there were integrated colleges, there were, all sorts of enlightened policies. Iowa itself never had anti-miscegenation laws. In theory, Jack could have gone home. His family would be legally acceptable in Iowa, but the social norms overlaid the laws that were created in what was frankly a more enlightened period, And one of the things that, the sense of lost opportunity that you get when you read about what the early abolitionists and so on really wanted to do, and did successfully, like those wonderful little colleges like Grinnell and Oberlin and so on. And then somehow or other, this glacier of amnesia passes over, and all kinds of good advance is lost, all sorts of sanity is lost, and I, in a way, I'm carrying out the narrative of Gilead in Jack, because Jack is not culturally attuned in a sense that makes him available to attitudes that would be unworthy of him, but that would have been very commonplace, that would have been authoritative in this period.
I'm wondering also, why do you suppose, despite all the literature to the contrary, do people expect love to be logical?
Frankly, I think we're probably learning a lesson about not expecting logic at all. I don't know. People, it's something about how they get along, in the world, the props that they have around them to keep them from straying or something, they want to find out what the rules are, and they want to follow the rules. So this is the general human personality. And it makes them so dependent on these structures that they can't step back and say, do I really want that to be the idea governing my life, I don't know why we're not. The news will be the news tomorrow again, but basically you can say that we're a very privileged slice of human history. We've had a lot of options, and even at that, it is not characteristic of people to stand back and look at what is controlling their lives and saying, is this how my brief passage through time is going to be spent,
I was just curious because I was reading some reviews where the reviewers were puzzling over why Della would spend any time at all with Jack, and I just thought, like, Really?
I get that reaction surprisingly often. Well, she was a college graduate. She could have.
It's it is a truly remarkable novel, and I think there is something to me that is interesting about the transformation that I see, at least, going from, it's not to say that there are no conversations in Housekeeping in your first novel, for example, but certainly there's not so much talk as this. And I wondered, I know that actually, I think you were probably the teacher that taught me the most about prosody. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on the prosody of this novel that you wanted to offer up.
I mean, basically, it was a matter, for me, it's always a matter of feeling that I understand my narrator's voice, that I can hear Jack speaking. He was fun to write in a way because he spends all of his time in a library, and he's very sophisticated in a way, very knowledgeable and very elusive, because in that sort of autodidactic way, he feels free to identify with what he's learned, what he knows, I'm always building a nest out of beautiful words and allusions that please me. And, it has to sound right to me. That's my whole formula for prosody. And also it has to fit the character.
Do you, so just for the writers out there, do you read aloud from the manuscript as a part of revising it?
I don't.
No.
I'm not a big reviser. I try to get things the way I want them in the first place, sentence by sentence, really. So what that means really is that I do the revising in my mind before I put anything on paper.
A kind of long inner listening.
Yes, exactly.
All right. I believe that we are now at the questions from the audience portion of our event tonight. And so if you have, those of you out there who would like to ask a question of Marilynne, please put it into the Ask a Question box. Marilynne, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilynne Robinson, Alexander Chee. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jared Jackson. I work in literary programs at PEN America. As Alex mentioned, we're going to move to a brief Q&A. The first question that we have is for you, Marilynne. How did your understanding of grace expand and change as you wrote Jack and over the arc of the Gilead novels?
That's an interesting question. In a way, I think I may have had an idea of grace that pre-existed the novels, and then, then I discover the relevance of it in particular instances as I write. I think it's probably an idea that has more authority for me than any other, and has more beauty, and frees circumstance more effectively than any other. So I don't know if my ideas of it expanded or if they were simply something that I had recourse to,
Thank you. The next question is actually for you, Alex. And it goes, this question's for Alex. Since Marilynne is not only a great writer, but also a great teacher, rare, you're lucky enough to study with her, what is an illuminating piece of advice from her that you have carried with you on your writing journey?
I remember, I have it right at my fingertips. In workshop, she described a story of mine and said that I had mostly written the wrong scenes. That there were scenes that were undescribed, that were sort of implied by the story, and then the scenes that were there were insufficient to the task of carrying the story. So there, and in this was a pretty profound lesson of a workshop also, because she also read a sentence out loud that I was very proud of, I recall. And she praised it, and then she said, this is the significant sentence in this story. The rest of the sentences in the story need to live up to that sentence, which was also a kind of incredible lesson as well. So those were, I've kept that sense of how the language of a piece of writing has to relate to itself, and also how you can wander away from the center of the drama in a story into things that the reader doesn't actually need to see. And it's also formed a lot of how I teach writing as well.
Thank you. This one will go back to you, Marilynne. I love the pace of your prose and love how the endings of your books are both convincing and unexpected. Can you talk a little bit about your process? Do you have the endings in mind when you begin, or do you discover them through the process of the writing?
Well, you know, Gilead kind of surprised me. You know, I hadn't expected to write that novel, and then I found that I was writing it and had written it. And so, you know, the ending, everything was a discovery for me. And I always feel my way through a book. I never design it ahead of time. But having written that book, then whenever I wrote another book that was basically in response to it, Lila has to marry John Ames, you know, and so, you know, I write toward an ending that preexists because it's in reference to a book that already exists. I do not by any means map out in any intentional way the course that a book will take. I like to be always responsive to what the text is suggesting to me.
Thank you. Our next question, I guess both of you can answer this if you'd like to. It seems as though we remain in a nation of amnesia, forgetting so many of the democratic ideals that Americans have set and aspired to since our founding. Do you have hope for this country? How can we help our divided neighbors share that old vision of justice, thoughtfulness, and grace?
We're going to have to work at it. I mean, that's true for sure. And one of the things is, you know, I think about, you know, like the great Jefferson, you know, formula, you know, all men are created equal. They are endowed with their creator. The sanctification and the assertion of the brilliance of the human person as definitive of the human person, and society being basically intended to honor that, you know. We never live up to it, but then that is how, you know, a very high ideal is something that you can rely on to fall short of, you know, but it's always there, you know. I mean, we've done 1,000 million things wrong, but we have never discovered the error of Jefferson's language, you know. It's something that people can feel is true, and true in the sense that merges with beautiful, you know. I think it's rarely true that people are not moved by that language. I think that we have, you know, it you know, it was better than Jefferson himself. It's better than all of us, but it's a precious, beautiful, unchanging thing. And we simply have to be loyal ethically, morally, aesthetically to this as a central ideal of the culture. I think that's, if we were to retrieve ourselves out of this morass that we found ourselves in now, I think that's what I would hope for.
Alex, would you like to say anything, or?
I just keep thinking about the need for solidarity with people who are utterly unlike ourselves, and I keep thinking about how the followers of a tyrant always forget that the law protects them when they fall out of the tyrant's favor. That we have come a long ways towards exchanging a system of laws for a system of privilege meted out according to one's proximity to power and favor, and that is perhaps one of our greatest threats right now.
Going off
The
that,
thing that
sorry.
sorry. What I like about Jefferson's formula is that it suggests that we can open the lives of people, that intrinsically they are brilliant things, and that we have to create society around the possibility of making them express that. I mean, that's how I see the world ornamenting itself. That's what, so it's a deep honor extended toward people, which I think is a more profound solidarity than intentional solidarity. Honor and acknowledging the mystery of anybody at all.
Building off that question, I think it's in relation to it. An audience member asked, how are you able to infuse your writing with grace and resilience, especially in times like these?
Well, frankly, I mean, I consider myself a realist. I look around and I see a lot of good-hearted, interesting people, and I'm not trying to. You know what I'm saying. I don't feel as though I have to travel the conventional route into some kind of desolation. I think that an aesthetic appreciation of the world that is well attuned to it would value it and find it beautiful. I think that grace exists in the fact that there is this sort of overwhelming beauty about people, however sad they are, however far they've gone astray. I mean, they're like nothing else in the universe, nothing in the universe. And by the scale of the universe, there are only a few of us, just a few billion people. They are to be cherished. They are to be appreciated radically. I think if you do that, you don't have to look farther for grace. You don't have to look farther for hope or value or anything else.
I've spent most of the year feeling like a needle that someone is pushing through a leather wallet. And I don't really feel, I spent most of this year writing about and thinking about the Japanese occupation of Korea, thinking about the AIDS epidemic, the early years of it, and the activism around that, and those have been subjects of interest to me, and in my writing for a long time. So in some ways, I don't feel so very changed by what's happened in terms of how I'm writing or what I'm reaching for. I feel like I'm still reaching for the same things. It has gotten much harder. I remember trying to keep a COVID diary, and one entry was just the date. that was it. I had to look at my my photos in my phone to remember what I did, which is a peculiar place to live. I think we're all being tested, and I suppose if you feel it's sufficient to the task in what you're writing, you should ask yourself, ask yourself some questions.
Do you know the books of Pak Kyung Lee?
I don't. Who is that writer?
She's now deceased. She's a South Korean writer who wrote a book a year during the whole period of the Japanese occupation and then stopped when Hiroshima happened.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Well, pardon.
How do we spell her name?
PAKKYUNGNI.
Ah, okay.
And the book that she has that's translated into English is called Land.
Ah, okay. Yes, I've heard of that novel. I have not read it yet. Thank you for telling me about her.
Also, I guess in the same vein as that, we'll have one more question. It's for both of you. And what are you reading right now, particularly for joy or for distraction or for hope?
In all candor, I have become very, very interested in a film called The Birdman of Alcatraz, which I think is a fantastically brilliant film that needs a sort of other reading, So I'm reading the book that the film was based on. Tomorrow I will receive, if Amazon speaks true, the book that Robert Stroud, the Birdman, actually wrote himself about penology. It's an old reform movement on an interesting subject. He's nobody knows how to think about him, whether he was psychopathic or utterly innocently brilliant, but anyway, I'm just interested in it. It's a piece of cultural history that I think is fascinating.
I've been reading this really incredible novel that I highly recommend, and then also I've been reading finally this. It's Fire in the Belly. It's Cynthia Carr's biography of the artist and writer David Wojnarowicz. So,
well, thank you both, Marilynne Robinson, Alexander Chee, with support from this evening's ASL interpreters, Mark Ramita and Ashley Rodriguez of ProBono ASL, for this delightful conversation. Pen Out Loud is PEN America's signature event series focused on amplifying diverse voices and convening vital conversations between authors, poets, journalists, artists, and activists. It's been our honor to partner with the Strand Bookstore and Scripps Presents this fall. We thank everyone who's joined us this season, and we hope that you have a great rest of your evening. Thank you both again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Great to see you.
Bye, Marilynne.